Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Rick-Game-Titacom video we're going to be discussing analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up over the past 24 or so hours. We're going to be starting things out with Coffee Lake, because the 100 and 200 series chipsets have been further modified to run with Coffee Lake based processors, so we're going to be discussing that very fact. Then we're going to go over some early results of Spectre and Meltdown, and then we're going to finish the video with Dell and their range of Inspiron 17 5000 laptops, and these are a combination of Dell's engineering combined with the Ryzen / Vega APUs that of course have become synonymous recently with quite a lot of news. So we'll start things out, as I said, with Coffee Lake. So a bit of groundwork. The 300 series chipset is of course what is required to run Coffee Lake. The 100 series boards were released for Skylake, the 200 series boards were released for Kaby Lake, and never the twain shall meet, while the 200 and 100 series are forward and backwardly compatible, respectively. If you had a Coffee Lake based processor, for the sake of argument, you could not slot it into a 100 series chipset, at least officially, and similarly if you bought a Kaby Lake processor, for the sake of argument, you could not run it on a 300 series chipset, at least officially. But there has been some modifications that have already popped up. A tweaker back in December of last year managed to get an i3-8350 running in a Z170 motherboard. The motherboard in question was an MSI Z170A X-Power Titanium, and what he did was essentially mess around with power delivery, and that allows him to get into Windows. It's worth noting that a spokesperson for Asus has already mentioned that Intel were the folks who were requesting that Coffee Lake support for the Z170 and 270 were disabled, and there have been other reports, which of course Intel have not 100% confirmed, to put it mildly, that the 300 series motherboards could indeed run Kaby Lake, but it was blocked by Intel, and it essentially would just need the firmware to support it. There was, however, one notable issue with the 8350 that I just mentioned. The first is that the IGP, not so much with the working, and the second is that the first X16, the PCIe graphics slot, was also not working, and thus it was still fairly early in the modification cycle, but it was a proof of concept. But now, modders have continued to work on this, and we have news that the 8100, the i3-8100, is indeed running on the 100 and 200 series boards. I'll link in the video description a guide for this. So far, the best results seem to come from ASRock motherboards, but it's better to have a slightly older revision of a BIOS, for example, prior to October 2017. Secondly, just to reduce the chances that your BIOS is going to become corrupted and you're going to brick the board, it's better to have a socketable BIOS chip, therefore you can remove it. And lastly, and this one is perhaps the most critical, there are higher power requirements for the i5 and i7 series processors, especially the K series, so it's possible that even if in future they do continue to modify this, there may be basically instability. Honestly, from the perspective of getting, let's say, a Skylake processor running on a 300 series motherboard, I think Intel should have just supported that out the gate. I can give them some leniency for the reverse, however. It's possible it is simply that the power distribution was enough where they didn't feel that all motherboards would be capable, and they felt that some motherboards would run out of spec. So they could have perhaps split it. For example, the quad-core processors for Coffee Lake would have been backwardly compatible, but maybe they just didn't want to do that. Intel have formally and officially stated that power delivery was the biggest issue, and according to a user on overclock.net, his name is Rootmoto, I'm going to read this verbatim. Little Hill contributed in adding the Coffee Lake CPU microcode and suggesting using the correct ME version to boot the CPU. Root user 123, which is himself, fixed the iGPU by extracting Coffee Lake iGPU VBIOS and using the latest GOP driver from Sonix and updating the VBIOS on GOP driver. And Descante, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, contributed in booting 6-core CPUs on an MSI Z270 motherboard. And finally, a couple of users, MovAX and 0xDead, solved the issue of PCIe 6x16 not working and CPU voltage readout fixes. So basically it is working, but obviously it's not officially supported. You may have issues if you want to run, let's say, the latest version of the BIOS, for example for Spectre and Meltdown. So it's very cool, it's awesome, but it does come with some caveats. Speaking of things which come with caveats, the Spectre and Meltdown patches, have now been officially released, and these are for Skylake or newer generations. So what is quite interesting about this is we already have some user-generated benchmarks. Now I'm sure there's going to be a lot more benchmarks that pop up over the next several weeks, but some early results have actually appeared on Reddit, and there are a couple of really nice ones, so I'm going to give them credit. We'll start some results of Coco Lourdes 15. He is using a GTX 1070 with a 6700K running at 4.6 GHz. And he's also tested it with a couple of other different CPU configurations as well, but that's emulated. In other words, he's disabled or switched off parts of his processor to do that, but the results should be pretty similar. So all of the results, of course, are run at 720p. This is to maximize the CPU workload while minimizing the GPU workload. And also, there are 3 sets of results. There's the average, the 1% low, and the 0.1% low. I won't read out all the results because they're going to be on screen, but there are a couple of interesting ones. I'm going to fixate myself on the 6700K. So, just speaking for a second of average frames per second, pre-patch 146 frames per second, after the patch 140 frames per second with the 6700K. The 6100 emulated was 90 versus 86, so not a massive big deal there. And indeed, if we were to look at the percentage loss in performance, well, it's not too bad. You're looking at just, average around 4% across the board, maybe 5%. Switching things over to Assassin's Creed Origins, once again, 720p, 50% resolution. I'm not going to read out all the results, but what we do see in terms of the 6100, which once again is emulated, it definitely bears the brunt of the performance impact. So the average frames per second are down by about 10%. It's not as bad though when you consider it's 51 frames per second down to 46 frames per second. A 0.1% low is from 35, however, down to 31, and that can definitely make an impact if things start to get a bit busier. When we switch to the 6700K, it's only, with the average frame per second, 2.25% though, so it's very little difference in average frame rate, but the 0.1% low at 6700K, then, well, that's 8.06%, so once again, that is kind of noticeable, but it's not terrible. Counter-Strike isn't as bad. We're looking at just a couple of percent difference, around 3 to 4%, seems fairly average across the board. Switching things to synthetics in Geekbench, we just have 6700K here. We have pre and post patch, so single thread 6159 versus 6063. Multi-thread, slightly more of an impact here, 21,277 versus 20,604. X 2.64 results. The time in seconds goes up about 20, so it's 479 versus 495. But the biggest loss is without question the Luxmark C++ Hotel, pre-patch 862, post-patch 745. Another chap on Reddit, which is r/Intel, just for your FYI, his name is Grumpy Reject, decided to show us CPU Z screenshots of his performance impact. So single thread, he's down 6%, he's now at 527 from 561, and multi-thread gets impacted further. It's down 8.35%, so from 4143 down to just 3796.9. You can't forget the 0.9. So it'll be curious to see how all of these results will play out. Now, I've actually had a couple of people asking me, am I going to be doing internal benchmarking for this? Honestly, I don't know. As a lot of people know, I'm going to be heading to the States. I'm basically leaving for my hotel on the 27th of this month, which is, well, not too long at all, actually. It's crazily fast, and I've got an awful lot. I've just had an interview with Neil Trevitt from NVIDIA. There's going to be a second part to that. I'm going to be editing that today. We have a conference that we're editing right now. There's another interview with a security company that's been slightly delayed because we had to wait for a few bits from them, but that's already here, so we're going to be starting that. We just got a couple of other pieces of hardware that we need to review. Basically, I'm going to be pretty swamped, so I'll try to do it, but I might wait for a might have to wait for myself to come back, essentially. And last up, we're going to discuss the rather quiet release of the Inspiron 17 5000 laptops, and these, of course, are powered by the AMD Ryzen / Vega APUs. The release timing is rather comical, considering just a couple of days ago, Dell essentially said that there is no duopoly when it comes to x86 processors. Indeed, Intel and only Intel are really the major players in this game. Everyone else is, to a degree, secondary. To their credit, though, they did say that AMD released some interesting products and helped to complete the lineup. So these laptops range from $680 up to $1,000. The most expensive, the $999.99 price, is actually a discount, whereas typically it would be $1,039. So talking about the more generic specifications first, 17.3 inch screen, which is 1080p, that's anti-glare, LED backlit, a single USB 2.0 port, dual USB 3.1 generation 1 ports, HDMI 1.4b, and of course the obligatory SD card reader. And because obviously everyone needs one, there's also a DVD optical drive as well. In terms of battery, it should be fairly reasonable with a 42Wh 3-cell battery, but that's where the similarities between the models end. The cheapest SKU, once again $680, I'm just going to round it up, features a Ryzen 3 2200U, excuse me. That's of course with a Vega 3 graphics, 8GB of memory, and 1TB 5400 RPM drive. With the highest end SKU, a Ryzen 5 2500U with a doubling of memory at standard, that's 16GB, and twice the capacity hard drive at 2TB. And also, it includes a 24/7 direct access to technical expert hardware and software support package, and this is also accidental damage service as well. In case you can't tell, the biggest mystery here is, well, where the hell is the SSD option? Maybe it's because it's more budget orientated, so they didn't feel that they could squeeze it in with this particular price point, but it's a bit of a shame. But with all of that said, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.